Unjustly imprisoned for theft, he cries out to God and experiences a miraculous deliverance. The sound of shattering porcelain pierced the peaceful morning as Michael Anderson's coffee cup crashed to the floor. Through the window, dawn's golden light filtered into their suburban home, casting long shadows across the family breakfast table. His children's laughter turned to startled silence at the sudden, aggressive pounding on their front door. Sarah, his wife of 15 years, froze mid-sentence, a piece of toast suspended halfway to her mouth. Before Michael could reach the door, it burst open with a deafening crack. FBI. Michael Anderson, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. The words hung in the air like poison, destroying their perfect morning in an instant. Before we begin this powerful story of faith and justice, please take a moment to like this video and share where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything to us. Michael Anderson wasn't just another face in the crowd of Providence, Rhode Island. At 42, he had built a reputation as the cornerstone of his community. Every Saturday morning, he could be found serving hot meals at the local homeless shelter, his warm smile and gentle demeanor bringing comfort to those who had lost everything. During the week, he managed the city's most respected accounting firm, Anderson Associates, known for their ethical practices and charitable contributions. The irony wasn't lost on those who would later whisper about his arrest. Michael had spent the past decade helping ex-convicts rebuild their lives through his Second Chance program, believing everyone deserved an opportunity for redemption. His own father had been incarcerated when Michael was young, shaping his lifelong mission to break the cycle of poverty and crime. Standing 6 feet tall with graying temples and kind brown eyes, Michael carried himself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. His colleagues often joked that he was too honest for his own good, refusing even the smallest ethical compromises that were common in their industry. This integrity had earned him the trust of clients ranging from small family businesses to major corporations, including Hayes Enterprises, owned by the influential Robert Hayes. Michael's childhood in South Providence's housing project seemed a lifetime away. He had worked his way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, graduating summa cum laude from Brown University. His success story became an inspiration for local youth, and he frequently spoke at schools about the power of education and perseverance. The Anderson Scholarship Foundation, which he established 5 years ago, had already helped 30 underprivileged students attend college. His relationship with Robert Hayes had begun 3 years ago when Hayes Enterprises hired his firm. Michael had initially been impressed by Hayes' apparent commitment to corporate responsibility, unaware that beneath the philanthropic facade lay a web of corruption that would eventually entangle him. Even as he managed Hayes' accounts, Michael remained blind to the elaborate scheme being woven around him, his very integrity making him the perfect scapegoat. The morning of his arrest, Michael had been planning the annual charity gala that raised funds for his foundation. The guest list included judges, politicians, and business leaders, many of whom would soon distance themselves from him. On his desk lay half-finished paperwork for a new youth center in his old neighborhood, a project that had been his dream for years. His office walls displayed not just his numerous civic awards, but also children's artwork, thank you cards from scholarship recipients, and drawings from kids at the homeless shelter. Among them hung a framed newspaper article from last year local hero Michael Anderson's journey from projects to philanthropy. The article would later be used to paint him as someone desperate to escape his past, willing to do anything to maintain his carefully constructed image. What made Michael particularly vulnerable was his absolute faith in the justice system. Despite his father's incarceration, or perhaps because of it, he believed that truth would always prevail. He had never imagined that his reputation for honesty would make him the perfect target, or that his extensive community connections would be twisted to suggest he had the means to orchestrate a massive financial fraud. The tragedy of Michael Anderson wasn't just that he was innocent of the crimes he would be accused of. It was that his very virtues, his transparency, his trust in others, his desire to help had made him the ideal candidate for an elaborate frame-up. In the weeks leading to his arrest, he had noticed minor discrepancies in the Hayes accounts but attributed them to clerical errors. His professional thoroughness in documenting these concerns would later be used as evidence that he had intimate knowledge of the fraudulent transactions. As dawn broke on that fateful morning, Michael Anderson was still the man everyone admired, loving father, devoted husband, pillar of the community. In a few hours, that carefully built life would shatter, testing not just his faith in justice but in humanity itself. The man who had helped so many find redemption would soon need to find his own path to salvation, though he didn't know it yet. Sarah Anderson stood as the epitome of grace under pressure, though she never imagined how much that strength would be tested. At 39, she balanced her role as a high school counselor with being mother to Emma, 14, and Daniel, 10. Her shoulder-length auburn hair and warm green eyes complemented a personality that put troubled teens at ease, making her office a sanctuary for students battling their own demons. The Anderson home, a restored Victorian in a quiet neighborhood, reflected Sarah's talent for creating warmth. Family photos lined the walls, telling the story of their 15-year marriage, their wedding day, Emma's first steps, Daniel's baseball games, family vacations, and countless moments of everyday joy. The breakfast nook where they gathered each morning had become sacred space, a daily ritual of connection before facing the world. Emma, their teenage daughter, inherited her father's analytical mind and her mother's compassion. Already a sophomore at Providence Academy, she excelled in debate club and volunteered at her father's youth center. Her dream was to become a civil rights attorney, inspired by her father's work with the underprivileged. Daniel, their son, was quieter but equally determined, showing early signs of his father's business acumen as he ran his elementary school's fundraisers with surprising sophistication. Before the arrest, the Andersons were viewed as the perfect family. Sarah had met Michael during her graduate studies at Brown, where she was researching educational inequality. Their shared passion for social justice sparked a romance that blossomed into a partnership dedicated to community service. Together, they had built not just a family but a legacy of helping others. Their life wasn't without its shadows. Sarah's own past included a brother lost to drug addiction, fueling her dedication to counseling at-risk youth. She understood the fragility of reputation and the importance of second chances, having watched her brother struggle to rebuild his life before his ultimate relapse and death. This personal tragedy had deepened her commitment to Michael's rehabilitation programs. The Anderson children grew up understanding privilege came with responsibility. Family dinners often included discussions about social issues and the importance of giving back. Emma and Daniel attended public school by choice, their parents believing in supporting the local community despite having means for private education. They were raised to see beyond social barriers, often inviting their father's program participants to holiday meals. Sarah's relationship with Robert Hayes' wife, Catherine, added another layer of complexity to their social circle. The two women served together on various charity boards, though Sarah always sensed something strained in Catherine's perfectly maintained facade. They had children the same age, but while the Anderson kids thrived in public school, the Hayes children attended exclusive private academies, creating a subtle but persistent tension. The morning of the arrest, Sarah had been planning a surprise for Michael's upcoming birthday, a family trip to his hometown in South Providence where he would announce the youth center's groundbreaking. The irony of timing would haunt her. Invitations to the surprise party sat unmailed on her desk, their hopeful message now a mockery of their circumstances. Their home's answering machine held messages about upcoming charity events, parent-teacher conferences, and Daniel's baseball practice. Normal life, captured in digital snippets, about to be shattered. Sarah had noticed Michael seemed preoccupied lately, spending late nights reviewing Hayes Enterprises files, but attributed it to his usual thoroughness. What no one knew, not even Sarah, was that Michael had recently discovered irregularities in Hayes' accounts that troubled him deeply. He had scheduled a meeting with Robert Hayes for the following week to discuss his concerns, a meeting that would never take place. The very documents he had gathered to protect his client would soon be used to condemn him. As the family sat down for breakfast that morning, they embodied the American dream, success achieved through hard work, dedication, and integrity. Their world seemed unshakable, built on a foundation of trust, love, and community service. None of them could have imagined how quickly that foundation could crumble, or how their faith in each other would become their only anchor in the storm ahead. The morning sun cast long shadows through the Anderson home as FBI agents stormed in, their boots tracking mud across Sarah's freshly vacuumed carpet. Special Agent Marcus Thompson, a veteran of financial crime investigations, led the raid with mechanical precision. "Michael Anderson, you're under arrest for embezzlement," money laundering and wire fraud, he announced, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent house. Emma screamed, dropping her school backpack while Daniel clutched his mother's waist, trembling. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, coffee cup slipping from her other hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. The sound of breaking porcelain seemed to punctuate the surreal moment, marking the exact second their perfect life began to unravel. "There must be some mistake," Michael stammered, raising his hands as agents roughly spun him around to handcuff him. "I haven't done anything wrong." His eyes met Sarah's across the room, conveying a mixture of confusion and desperate reassurance. The cold steel of handcuffs bit into his wrists as Agent Thompson began reading him his rights. The search was methodical and devastating. Agents spread through the house like an invading army, opening drawers, upending furniture, and examining every document they could find. In Michael's home office they discovered a laptop hidden behind a false panel in his desk, a computer he had never seen before, planted the night before by one of Hayes's operatives who had access to the house through their security company. "Look what we have here," announced Agent Thompson, holding up the laptop triumphantly. Sarah watched in horror as they also pulled out offshore banking documents from a folder she'd never seen, tucked behind the family photos on Michael's desk. "These were exactly where our informant said they would be," Thompson noted with satisfaction, shooting Michael a cold glare. The evidence seemed overwhelming: fake passports in a hidden safe behind a family portrait, foreign bank account statements showing millions in transferred funds, and encrypted files detailing an elaborate money laundering scheme. Each piece had been carefully planted over the previous weeks, creating a perfect trail of breadcrumbs leading to Michael's conviction. Robert Hayes watched from his car parked across the street, a satisfied smile playing across his features as he witnessed his plan unfold. His own crimes would remain hidden, buried beneath the mountain of evidence pointing to Michael. He had chosen his scapegoat well, who would believe that the community's moral compass could be capable of such elaborate fraud. The neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Peterson, who had just last week praised Michael at the community meeting, now whispered to her husband, "I always thought he was too good to be true." The swift transformation from respected citizen to suspected criminal played out in real time across their faces. As Michael was led to the waiting FBI vehicle, he caught a glimpse of Emma's face in the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad," she cried out, but Sarah held her back, knowing there was nothing they could do in that moment. Daniel had retreated to a corner, his small body shaking with silent sobs. "I love you," Michael called out to his family. "Everything will be okay. The truth will come out." But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept into his voice. The weight of the evidence against him seemed insurmountable, and he could already see the shadows of suspicion crossing the faces of people he had considered friends. In the FBI car, Michael watched his home shrink in the rearview mirror. Agent Thompson sat beside him, flipping through the evidence with an air of smug satisfaction. "You people are all the same," he commented. "Think your charity work makes you untouchable? Well, not this time, Mr. Anderson." The cruel irony wasn't lost on Michael. His years of helping others, his transparent business practices, his impeccable record-keeping had all made him the perfect fall guy. Every documentation of his legitimate work with Hayes Enterprises would now be scrutinized for signs of fraud, every charitable donation examined for traces of money laundering. As they drove away, Robert Hayes pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's done," he said simply. "Anderson took the fall exactly as planned. Make sure our friends at the prosecutor's office know to push for maximum charges." He ended the call and drove away, leaving behind a family shattered and a community already beginning to doubt one of its most trusted members. The Providence County Courthouse loomed like a monument to Michael's worst nightmare as federal marshals led him up the granite steps in shackles. News cameras flashed, capturing his fall from grace in high definition. The headline, "Trusted Community Leader Accused of Massive Fraud," already blazed across local news channels, the media feeding frenzy in full swing. Judge William Harrison presided over the initial hearing, his reputation for harsh sentences preceding him. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and former friends, all straining to glimpse Michael in his orange jumpsuit. Sarah sat in the front row, her back straight, refusing to show weakness despite the whispers around her. Emma and Daniel weren't present. Sarah had decided to shield them from this particular humiliation. District Attorney Richard Palmer, known for his political ambitions, personally handled the prosecution. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with manufactured outrage, "we have here a man who betrayed not just his clients but an entire community's trust. The evidence suggests Mr. Anderson embezzled over $20 million through an elaborate scheme spanning 3 years. Michael's court-appointed defender, James Murphy, seemed overwhelmed from the start. Fresh out of law school and drowning in student debt, he shuffled his papers nervously, barely making eye contact with his client. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence and has deep roots in the community he started," but Judge Harrison cut him off with a wave of his hand. The prosecution presented their evidence with theatrical flourish. Bank statements, offshore accounts, encrypted files, all fabricated but presented with convincing authenticity. The laptop found in Michael's office revealed a complex network of transactions, each seemingly pointing to his guilt. The FBI's forensic accountant testified about the sophisticated nature of the scheme, inadvertently highlighting Michael's financial expertise. Sarah watched in horror as former colleagues and clients were called to testify. People Michael had helped for years now turned against him, reinterpreting every generous act as an attempt to hide his crimes. He insisted on handling the charity accounts personally. One board member testified. "Now we know why." Robert Hayes made a brief appearance, playing the role of the betrayed client perfectly. "I trusted him completely," Hayes declared, his performance worthy of an Oscar. "Our charitable initiatives were particularly important to me. To think he was using them to launder money." He shook his head sadly, while Michael clenched his fists under the defense table. The prosecution's masterstroke came when they revealed an anonymous whistleblower, a fabricated source, whose identity was protected but whose detailed testimony aligned perfectly with the planted evidence. The courtroom murmured as documents were presented showing apparent payoffs to offshore accounts, all traced back to Michael's signature. When bail was discussed, Palmer painted Michael as a flight risk. "Your Honor, we have evidence of multiple false passports and connections to foreign banks. Mr. Anderson has both the means and the motivation to flee." The judge nodded gravely, refusing bail despite Michael's deep community ties. Sarah tried to approach Michael after the hearing, but marshals quickly stepped between them. Their eyes met briefly across the courtroom, a moment of connection and chaos. "Stay strong," Michael mouthed before being led away. Sarah's hand clutched her chest, feeling their world crumble further. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Sarah. "Mrs. Anderson, did you know about your husband's illegal activities? How long has he been deceiving everyone? What about the scholarship foundation money?" She pushed through them silently, her head high, though her heart was breaking. The evening news painted Michael as a master manipulator who had fooled everyone for years. His charitable works were recast as elaborate covers for his criminal enterprise. Even his childhood in the projects was twisted, suggested as motivation for his alleged crimes, a poor boy's revenge against the system. That night, alone in her bed, Sarah read through the indictment papers. 37 counts of financial fraud, each carrying potential sentences of up to 20 years. The numbers blurred as tears fell on the pages. In their children's room, she could hear muffled sobs, Emma and Daniel trying to be strong, just like their parents had taught them. Meanwhile, in a holding cell awaiting transfer to the federal detention center, Michael sat on a cold metal bench, his head in his hands. The system he had trusted, had worked within for years to help others, had turned against him with devastating efficiency. His faith, both in justice and humanity, faced its first real test. Michael Anderson dedicated his life to helping others, from feeding the homeless to creating scholarships for underprivileged kids, a man of integrity who deserves a simple like for his kindness. Yet sadly, he hasn't received one from you yet. Show your support by hitting that like button below. The federal detention center's steel doors clanged shut behind Michael with a finality that echoed through his soul. The pristine suits and polished shoes that had marked his former life were replaced by an orange jumpsuit and cheap rubber sandals. Prisoner 247891, his new identity stripped down to a number. His first night in general population was a symphony of nightmare sounds, distant screams, metal doors slamming, guards' boots on concrete floors, and the constant murmur of men pushed to their limits. Sleep evaded him as he lay on the thin mattress, his mind racing through the events that had brought him here. The other inmates quickly sized him up a white-collar criminal, they assumed soft from his comfortable life. The first attack came in the shower 3 days after his arrival. 2 men, their faces covered with makeshift masks, left him with bruised ribs and a split lip. "Rich boy needs to learn his place," one sneered as they walked away. It was in the prison chapel where Michael first met Pastor James Wilson. The pastor wasn't what Michael expected, a tall, muscular man with graying dreadlocks and arms covered in faded tattoos. "I see you've met the welcome committee," Pastor James said, noticing Michael's injuries as he helped him to a seat. James Wilson had his own story. A former gang member who found his calling while serving a 10-year sentence, he now dedicated his life to helping inmates find purpose beyond their circumstances. "God doesn't make mistakes, brother," he told Michael. "Even this place can have a purpose in your journey." Initially, Michael resisted the pastor's attempts at friendship. His faith, once unshakable, had been severely tested. "If God is just, why am I here?" he demanded one evening during a counseling session. Pastor James simply smiled. "Sometimes the darkest road leads to the brightest light." The pastor became Michael's lifeline in the harsh prison environment. He taught Michael the unwritten rules of survival, how to carry himself to avoid becoming a target, and most importantly, how to maintain his dignity in a place designed to strip it away. "Your body might be imprisoned," James would say, "but your spirit remains free." Through Pastor James, Michael began participating in the prison's literacy program, teaching fellow inmates to read and write. It gave him purpose, a way to continue his mission of helping others, even behind bars. Some of his students were the same men who had initially threatened him, their respect grudgingly earned through his persistent dedication. The pastor's own past became a source of inspiration. "I was guilty of my crimes," James confided one day. "You're innocent of yours. But guilt and innocence matter less than what you do with your circumstances." These words would echo in Michael's mind during his darkest moments. One night, after a particularly brutal day when he learned Emma had been bullied at school because of him, Michael found himself contemplating suicide. Pastor James found him in the chapel, staring at a makeshift noose fashioned from torn sheets. Without a word, the pastor sat beside him until dawn, sharing stories of hope and redemption until the darkness passed. "Your family needs you alive," Pastor James reminded him. "Your truth needs you alive." The simple words penetrated Michael's despair, giving him strength to face another day. The pastor taught him to pray again, not with the polite prayers of his former life, but with raw, honest devotion born of suffering. Through Pastor James, Michael also met others who claimed innocence, some lying, some telling the truth. He learned to listen without judgment, understanding that every person's story was complex. The pastor encouraged him to keep a journal, documenting not just his case, but his spiritual journey. "Prison ministry isn't just about preaching," James explained during their evening talks. "It's about being present in the darkness with those who have lost their way." These conversations became Michael's anchor, helping him maintain his sanity as the months dragged on. As Michael's faith slowly rebuilt, transformed by fire and tragedy, he began to see his imprisonment differently. Each day brought new challenges, but also opportunities to touch lives he would never have encountered in his former world. Pastor James watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction, knowing that sometimes God's greatest works happen behind bars. The friendship between the refined accountant and the ex-gang member turned pastor became legendary in the prison, a testament to how grace could bridge any divide. Remember, Pastor James would say, "Diamonds are formed under pressure." Michael was being transformed, though the cost of that transformation was higher than he could have imagined. Sarah Anderson's world contracted with brutal swiftness after Michael's arrest. The phone stopped ringing. Dinner invitations disappeared. Parents requested their children be transferred from her counseling caseload at school. Even the grocery store became a gauntlet of whispers and averted eyes. The Providence Academy Parents Association, where she had served as president for 3 years, quietly asked for her resignation. "It's for the best," Barbara Thompson, her former friend, explained with practiced sympathy. "We need to consider the school's reputation." Sarah handed over her keys with dignity, though her hands trembled. Financial reality hit hard and fast. Their accounts were frozen, legal bills mounted. The mortgage payment loomed. Sarah sold her jewelry first, then her car, downgrading to an old Honda that struggled to start on cold mornings. The children's college funds remained untouched, her last line of defense against complete devastation. Emma, once popular and confident, faced brutal bullying at school. Former friends became tormentors, sharing social media posts about living with a criminal the debate team she had captained asked her to step down. One morning, Sarah found her daughter's debate trophies in the trash, along with her father's framed newspaper articles. Daniel's struggle manifested differently. The bright, energetic 10-year-old became withdrawn, his grades plummeting. His baseball coach benched him, claiming parents had concerns. At night, Sarah found him sleeping in Michael's closet, surrounded by his father's shirts, seeking comfort in the lingering scent of home. The church they had attended for 15 years proved especially painful. The pastor who had praised Michael's generosity countless times now preached about wolves in sheep's clothing. Sarah watched as church members crossed the street to avoid her, their former fellowship evaporating like morning dew. Their neighbors, the Petersons, who had shared countless barbecues and holiday celebrations, installed security cameras pointed at the Anderson home. "Just being cautious," Mr. Peterson explained when confronted. "We have to protect ourselves." The implied message was clear. They were now considered dangerous by association. Sarah took a second job waiting tables at night, wearing a name tag that read "and" to avoid recognition. Some nights, regular customers from her old life came in. They never acknowledged her, but their tips often included notes: "How could you not have known?" or "Your children deserve better." The hardest blow came when Emma's godmother, Catherine Hayes, Robert's wife, publicly denounced them at a charity gala. "We were all deceived," she declared to reporters, tears streaming perfectly down her cheeks. "The Andersons exploited our trust and friendship." Sarah watched the performance on local news, recognizing the designer dress she had helped Catherine choose months ago. Daniel developed stress-induced asthma, requiring expensive medications their diminished insurance barely covered. During one severe attack, Sarah rushed him to the emergency room, only to have the nurse recognize her and whisper to colleagues. The treatment seemed deliberately slow, the staff's cold professionalism masking barely concealed contempt. Every prison visit meant enduring guards' suspicious searches and other visitors' knowing looks. Sarah held her head high, though her heart crumbled seeing Michael in his orange jumpsuit, their conversations monitored, their affection restricted to brief hugs. She never let him see her cry, saving her tears for the long drive home. The media camped outside their house during the first weeks, forcing Sarah to install blackout curtains. Reporters ambushed Emma and Daniel after school, shouting questions about their father's crimes. Local news ran specials on the Anderson scandal featuring interviews with close sources who claimed they had always suspected something was wrong. The scholarship foundation Michael had established was disbanded, its funds frozen pending investigation. Sarah watched former recipients being interviewed on TV, questioning whether their college dreams would be crushed. The youth center project collapsed, leaving an empty lot as a monument to broken promises. Some nights, Sarah sat alone in their bedroom, clutching Michael's pillow, overwhelmed by the weight of maintaining strength for her children while her own world crumbled. The woman who had counseled countless troubled teens now struggled to find hope in her own darkness. Yet each morning, Sarah rose, applied her makeup like armor, and faced another day. She drove her children to school in the unreliable Honda, attended every parent-teacher conference despite the cold shoulders, and kept fighting. Her new mantra became simple survival: just keep going. She would not give their accusers the satisfaction of seeing her break. In her darkest moments, Sarah clung to one certainty: she knew her husband. No evidence, no social rejection, no public shame could shake her faith in Michael's innocence. This conviction became her North Star, guiding her through the storm of betrayal and loss that their life had become. Sarah's breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday evening as she sorted through Michael's old files, searching for anything that might help his case. Between tax documents and charity reports, she found a small notebook with hastily scrawled notes about irregularities in Hayes Enterprises accounts. The last entry, dated 3 days before Michael's arrest, read: "Third discrepancy this month. Meeting with Robert next week. Something isn't right." Detective Thomas Parker wasn't supposed to be involved in the case. As a local police detective specializing in financial crimes, the FBI's investigation was officially off limits. But something about the Anderson case nagged at him. He had worked with Michael on several community projects, and the allegations didn't match the man he knew. Their first meeting happened by chance at a downtown coffee shop. Sarah was reviewing Michael's notes for the 100th time when Parker approached her table. "Mrs. Anderson," he said quietly, "I might be able to help." He slid into the seat across from her, his weathered face showing signs of someone who had seen too much corruption to accept easy answers. Parker, a 20-year veteran of the force, had his own reasons for doubting the official narrative. 6 months earlier, he had begun investigating Robert Hayes for potential connections to organized crime. The investigation was suddenly shut down by his superiors without explanation. Michael's arrest felt like too much of a coincidence. "The evidence against your husband is too perfect," Parker explained, sipping his black coffee. "In 20 years of financial crime investigations, I've never seen a paper trail this clean. It's like someone wanted it to be found." Sarah's hands trembled as she shared Michael's notebook, watching Parker's eyes narrow as he read the entries. Their investigation began cautiously. Parker couldn't officially work the case, and Sarah risked violating Michael's bail conditions by investigating. They met in different locations each time: coffee shops, park benches, once in a church basement, sharing information and building a parallel narrative to the official investigation. Parker's contacts in the banking sector proved invaluable. Through them, they discovered that the offshore accounts traced to Michael had been opened using sophisticated identity theft techniques. The signatures, while appearing genuine, showed microscopic signs of digital manipulation when examined by Parker's forensic expert friend. Sarah started tracking Hayes's public appearances and charitable donations. A pattern emerged: large donations coinciding with major business deals, followed by mysterious withdrawals from the charitable foundations. Michael had noticed these discrepancies but hadn't understood their significance until it was too late. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Catherine Hayes's personal assistant, Jessica Martinez, reached out to Sarah after being fired for asking too many questions. She brought copies of emails showing Robert Hayes discussing the need to handle the Anderson situation. Weeks before Michael's arrest, the emails were coded, but their intent was clear. Parker's investigation revealed deeper corruption. Several key FBI agents involved in Michael's case had received mysterious deposits in their accounts. The judge who denied Michael's bail had recently purchased a vacation home he couldn't possibly afford on his salary. The threads of conspiracy ran deeper than either of them had imagined. They discovered that Hayes Enterprises was merely the tip of the iceberg. Robert Hayes had built an elaborate network of shell companies, each designed to launder money from various criminal enterprises. Michael's meticulous accounting had unknowingly threatened to expose the entire operation. Sarah and Parker worked late into the nights, piecing together evidence on her dining room table after the children were asleep. Emma sometimes found her mother there in the morning, having fallen asleep among scattered documents and coffee cups. The teenager began helping, her debate skills proving useful in organizing their findings. The danger of their investigation became apparent when Sarah's brake lines were cut. Only Parker's warning to check her car daily prevented a tragedy. Notes appeared in her mailbox, first subtle warnings, then explicit threats against her children. Each threat only strengthened her resolve to uncover the truth. Parker faced his own challenges. His superiors began questioning his caseload, suggesting he take a vacation. Anonymous complaints appeared in his file. His daughter's college acceptance was mysteriously rescinded. The message was clear: powerful people wanted him to stop digging. Their investigation revealed a pattern of similar cases across multiple states: honest financial professionals framed for crimes they didn't commit, all with connections to Hayes's business empire. Each case followed the same template: perfect evidence trails, swift convictions, and seized assets that somehow ended up in Hayes's control. The web of corruption extended into every level of law enforcement and the judiciary. Judges, prosecutors, and FBI agents had been compromised through a combination of bribes and blackmail. Hayes had spent years building his influence, preparing for the moment when he would need to sacrifice someone like Michael. Sarah and Parker documented everything meticulously, creating multiple copies stored in secure locations. They knew their evidence would need to be ironclad to overcome the wall of corruption they faced. Each new discovery added another piece to the puzzle, building a case that could not only free Michael but expose a criminal empire. As they dug deeper, they began to understand why Michael had been chosen. His reputation for integrity made him the perfect scapegoat who would believe such an upstanding citizen would investigate his own crimes. His detailed record-keeping, intended to ensure transparency, had provided the perfect framework for planting false evidence. Their investigation became a race against time. Hayes's influence was growing, and they knew it was only a matter of time before he discovered their activities. Sarah worked with a desperate intensity, knowing that each day Michael spent in prison increased the danger to him and their family. Parker's experience taught them to trust no one completely. They developed a coded communication system, using classified ads in the local paper to arrange meetings. Sarah learned to check for surveillance, to vary her routines to protect her digital communications. The former school counselor was becoming an unskilled investigator out of necessity. The human cost of their investigation weighed heavily on both of them. Parker's marriage strained under the pressure of his unofficial case. Sarah barely slept, jumping at every sound in the night, but they pressed on, driven by the conviction that they were Michael's only hope for justice. The first serious attack came 6 months into Michael's imprisonment. 3 inmates cornered him in the laundry room, faces hidden behind makeshift masks. Hayes sends his regards, one whispered before the beating began. Michael fought back but was outnumbered. When the guards finally intervened, he had 2 broken ribs and internal bleeding. In the prison infirmary, lying on a thin mattress under flickering fluorescent lights, Michael faced his darkest moment yet. The physical pain was nothing compared to the realization that Hayes could reach him even here. Pastor James visited daily, bringing not just spiritual comfort but practical advice on survival. "The walls have eyes," Brother James warned, teaching Michael to watch for signs of orchestrated violence. They developed a system of silent signals with trusted inmates, creating a network of protection. But the constant vigilance took its toll, turning every shadow into a potential threat, every conversation into a possible trap. The prison hierarchy shifted subtly around Michael. Some inmates, hearing rumors about the true nature of his case, began offering protection. Others, paid by outside forces, waited for opportunities to hurt him. Michael learned to sleep lightly, to never turn his back on open spaces, to check his food for tampering. His faith, once a bedrock of certainty, crumbled under the weight of constant fear. During one particularly dark night, after learning Emma had been hospitalized for anxiety attacks, Michael raged against God in the solitude of his cell. "Where are you?" he screamed silently into his pillow. "Why have you abandoned us?" Pastor James found him the next morning, still wrestling with his crisis of faith. "Job lost everything too," the pastor reminded him. But his story didn't end there. They spent hours discussing suffering, justice, and the mystery of divine purpose. Slowly, Michael began to understand faith not as certainty, but as choice in the face of doubt. The prison library became his sanctuary. Michael immersed himself in books about wrongful convictions, legal precedents, and prison reform. He started a study group, teaching fellow inmates about their rights and appeal processes. This new mission gave him purpose, but also made him more targets for those who preferred inmates to remain ignorant. A second attack came during dinner, a carefully orchestrated riot that left Michael with a concussion and knife wounds. As he recovered, evidence of Hayes's influence grew clearer. Guards looked the other way during crucial moments. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. Even the prison doctor seemed reluctant to document his injuries properly. Pastor James helped Michael understand the deeper game being played. "They're trying to break more than your body," he explained. "They want to break your spirit, make you give up hope." The pastor's own experiences with systematic oppression provided a framework for understanding the invisible forces aligned against him. Michael's fellow inmates in the literacy program became an unexpected source of strength. Many had faced similar systemic injustices, though few had experienced such coordinated persecution. They shared stories of survival, teaching Michael street wisdom that his privileged life hadn't prepared him for. The hardest moments came during family visits. Seeing Sarah's brave face, noticing how thin she'd become, watching Emma and Daniel grow up through monthly visits, each reunion was both precious and painful. Michael struggled to maintain a positive facade while knowing the danger his family faced on the outside. His journals became both testimony and therapy. Michael documented everything: the attacks, the suspicious patterns, the conversations overheard. He wrote letters to his children, saving them for when they were older, explaining why he refused to take a plea deal that would have reduced his sentence in exchange for a false confession. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest aspect. Former friends and colleagues stopped responding to letters. The charity boards he had served on publicly distanced themselves. Even his old church asked Sarah to stop sending his tithe checks. The outside world seemed determined to forget Michael Anderson ever existed. Prison politics demanded constant navigation. Michael learned to recognize the complex alliances and feuds that governed inmate society. He built careful relationships with key players, earning respect through his education programs while avoiding entanglement in their power struggles. Every day required a delicate balance between survival and maintaining his principles. Through it all, Pastor James remained his anchor. The pastor's own journey from gang leader to spiritual mentor offered a blueprint for transformation. "Sometimes God allows us to be broken," James would say, "so we can be rebuilt stronger." These conversations, often lasting late into the night, helped Michael reconstruct his shattered worldview. The violence never completely stopped, but Michael adapted. He learned to read the subtle signs that preceded an attack, to position himself near cameras and guards, to maintain awareness without paranoia. Each incident hardened his resolve rather than breaking it. If Hayes thought violence would silence him, he had gravely miscalculated. Most challenging was maintaining hope when everything seemed designed to destroy it. The appeals process moved painfully slowly. Evidence disappeared from case files. Witnesses changed their stories. The system that Michael had once trusted revealed itself as deeply corrupted, yet he refused to become cynical. Instead, Michael channeled his anger into action. He began documenting systemic abuses within the prison, gathering testimonies from other inmates facing injustice. Even from behind bars, he found ways to fight the corruption that had ensnared him, knowing each small victory brought him closer to exposing the truth. Through his darkest moments, Michael held on to one certainty: his family's love. Sarah's unwavering faith in his innocence, Emma's determination to uncover the truth, Daniel's quiet loyalty — these became his reasons to persist. Each attack, each betrayal, each moment of despair was answered by the memory of their strength. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when Sarah and Detective Parker discovered a pattern in Hayes's political donations. Through shell companies and charitable foundations, Hayes had been systematically buying influence across state lines. Campaign contributions, perfectly legal on the surface, masked a deeper web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of state government. Governor William Marshall's sudden support for controversial development projects made sense when Parker traced the money. Offshore accounts linked to Hayes had made substantial deposits to companies owned by the governor's family members. Each project approval corresponded with a new charitable donation from Hayes Enterprises, creating a perfect circle of corruption. The state's Attorney General, Margaret Reynolds, had received similar payments disguised as speaking fees at Hayes's corporate events. Her office had personally intervened to expedite Michael's prosecution, pushing aside standard procedures in what she called a clear-cut case of financial fraud. The speed of Michael's arrest and conviction suddenly had context. FBI Special Agent Thompson, who had led Michael's arrest, owned a vacation home in the Cayman Islands purchased through a company traced back to Hayes's network. His aggressive pursuit of the case, his dismissal of exculpatory evidence, his targeting of Michael's assets all pointed to a carefully orchestrated takedown. Sarah and Parker brought their findings to federal judge Catherine Chen, known for her incorruptible reputation. Meeting in her chambers after hours, they laid out the evidence of systematic corruption. The judge's face grew grimmer with each document. "This goes beyond one wrongful conviction," she noted. "This is a capture of the entire justice system." Working with Judge Chen, they began connecting more dots. Hayes's influence extended into prison administration, explaining the suspicious patterns of violence against Michael. The private prison company holding Michael's contract had received mysterious investments from Hayes's shell corporation shortly before his conviction. The web of corruption touched local media as well. The newspaper that had once celebrated Michael's charitable work was partially owned by a Hayes subsidiary. Their aggressive coverage of his arrest, their refusal to investigate inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, everything served Hayes's narrative. State Senator James Morrison became an unlikely ally after his son committed suicide. The young man had been investigating Hayes's connections to environmental violations when he was suddenly charged with drug possession. The charges were dropped after Morrison backed off, but his son never recovered from the public shame. Morrison provided crucial evidence about Hayes's manipulation of state contracts. Every major infrastructure project for the past 5 years had gone to companies within Hayes's network, often at inflated prices. The excess profits funded more bribes, more influence, more power in an ever-expanding circle of corruption. The investigation revealed Hayes's starting point a failed savings and loan in the 1990s. Rather than face prosecution, he had turned state's evidence, using his knowledge of financial crimes to build his own criminal empire. Michael's honest accounting had threatened to expose this history, making him a threat that needed to be eliminated. Judge Chen helped them understand the legal machinery Hayes had corrupted. Judicial appointments, prosecutor assignments, even jury pools had been subtly influenced through a network of compromised officials. Michael's case was just one example of how Hayes could manipulate the system to destroy anyone who threatened his interests. Sarah discovered Hayes's pattern with other victims. In each state where he operated, at least one honest professional had been framed and convicted. Accountants, auditors, compliance officers, anyone who got too close to the truth found themselves facing perfect evidence of crimes they hadn't committed. Parker's police contacts in other states began sharing similar stories. Hayes's method was consistent: identify a threat, create an ironclad case through planted evidence and corrupted officials, then use the victim's assets to expand his influence. Michael's reputation for integrity had made him an ideal target. The scope of Hayes's operation stunned even the most cynical investigators. He had effectively created a shadow government, using seemingly legitimate businesses and charities to move money and influence. Environmental regulations were ignored, safety standards bypassed, public funds diverted, all protected by a wall of corrupted officials. Judge Chen insisted on building the case methodically. Hayes didn't create this corruption overnight, she warned. We can't expose it overnight either. They needed every detail documented, every connection verified, every witness secured before they could move against such entrenched power. The danger increased as their investigation expanded. Morrison's office was broken into, Parker's phone was tapped, and Sarah received more explicit threats against her children. Judge Chen arranged federal protection for key witnesses, knowing Hayes would stop at nothing to protect his empire. The human cost of Hayes's corruption became clearer with each new discovery. Communities poisoned by illegal dumping, workers killed in unsafe conditions, families destroyed by wrongful convictions, all sacrificed to Hayes's greed and power. Michael's case was just one thread in a tapestry of systematic exploitation. As they built their case, Sarah realized the true scope of what they faced. This wasn't just about freeing Michael anymore. They were challenging a system that had turned justice itself into a commodity, sold to the highest bidder. The question wasn't just whether they could prove Michael's innocence, but whether they could survive exposing the truth. Nathan Cooper had been Hayes's personal accountant for 15 years before his conscience finally broke him. A quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses and trembling hands, he had documented every transaction, every bribe, every shell company transfer. Now, sitting in a safe house with Sarah and Detective Parker, he unfolded the true depth of Hayes's criminal empire. I kept 2 sets of books, Cooper explained, his voice barely above a whisper. The official records, perfect for audits and tax returns, and the real numbers. He produced a thumb drive containing decades of meticulous records. Your husband saw discrepancies because Hayes got sloppy. He thought he was untouchable. Cooper's testimony was explosive. He detailed how Hayes had systematically corrupted state officials, judges, and law enforcement. The evidence he provided showed Michael's conviction was part of a larger pattern. Honest professionals who threatened Hayes's operation were systematically destroyed through fabricated evidence and rushed trials. The danger to Cooper was immediate and severe. Within hours of his first meeting with Sarah and Parker, his brother's car exploded in Boston. A warning. His elderly mother received visits from insurance salesmen who asked detailed questions about her daily routine. His daughter's college acceptance was mysteriously rescinded. Judge Chen moved Cooper to a series of safe houses, each location known only to a handful of trusted officers. He continued providing testimony via secure video links, each session revealing new layers of corruption. Hayes's network responded with escalating violence, targeting anyone connected to the investigation. Cooper's documentation provided the skeleton key to Hayes's operation. Financial records showed how legitimate businesses were used to launder money from illegal operations. Charitable foundations served as conduits for bribes. Environmental violations were covered up through a network of paid officials. Michael's real crime, Cooper explained during one session, was being too honest. Hayes had spent years building a system that depended on everyone looking the other way. Your husband refused to play along, even unknowingly. The irony of Michael's integrity being his downfall wasn't lost on anyone. The stress began to show on Cooper. He lost weight, developed insomnia, jumped at sudden noises. But he continued testifying, driven by a need to atone for his years of complicity. "I watched Hayes destroy dozens of lives," he confessed to Sarah. "Your husband's case finally made me see I couldn't live with myself anymore." His testimony detailed the specific mechanics of Michael's frame-up. Hayes had used Cooper's intimate knowledge of financial systems to create the perfect paper trail. Every transaction was backdated, every document aged, every signature forged with precision. The evidence that had convinced the jury was a masterpiece of fraudulent documentation. Cooper revealed how Hayes had compromised key members of the FBI investigation team. Agent Thompson's offshore accounts, the prosecutor's hidden payments, the judge's vacation home, everything had been arranged through Cooper's careful bookkeeping. He had recorded it all, insurance against the day Hayes might turn on him. Personal cost to Cooper mounted. His wife divorced him, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. His former colleagues shunned him. Professional associations revoked his certifications. Hayes's machine worked to destroy his credibility before he could testify in court, painting him as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. Yet Cooper persisted. Working with Judge Chen's team, he helped decode years of financial records. Each revelation brought new indictments, new investigations, new exposed corruption. Hayes's empire began to show cracks as officials scrambled to save themselves, turning on their former benefactor. The safe houses became Cooper's prison. He couldn't risk public appearances, couldn't contact his family, couldn't maintain any routine that might give away his location. Parker arranged secure video calls with his daughter, each one ending with tears as Cooper realized how much of her life he was missing. Sarah spent hours with Cooper, learning the intricacies of Hayes's operation. His detailed knowledge helped her understand exactly how Michael had been framed, which evidence was fabricated, which witnesses had been coerced. This understanding would be crucial for overturning Michael's conviction. Cooper's testimony also revealed the human cost of Hayes's corruption. He described communities where toxic waste was illegally dumped, workers who died in unsafe conditions, families displaced by fraudulent development projects. The scope of Hayes's crimes went far beyond financial fraud, touching thousands of lives. The stress began manifesting physically. Cooper developed heart problems, requiring secure medical facilities. Each move between safe houses carried the risk of exposure. Hayes's network seemed to have eyes everywhere, forcing increasingly elaborate security measures. During one particularly difficult session, Cooper broke down. "I should have spoken up years ago," he sobbed. "How many lives could I have saved? How many families could I have protected?" Sarah found herself comforting the man who had helped frame her husband, understanding that redemption came at a terrible price. The breakthrough in Michael's case came when Cooper revealed Hayes's ultimate motivation. Michael's honest accounting had threatened to expose a massive money laundering operation involving international drug cartels. Hayes hadn't just been protecting his business interests, he'd been preventing the exposure of criminal connections that would have destroyed him completely. As Cooper's testimony neared its conclusion, the danger peaked. Attempts on his life became more frequent, more sophisticated. Judge Chen moved him to a military facility, the highest level of protection they could provide. But everyone knew it was just a matter of time before Hayes's network found a way through their defenses. Through it all, Cooper maintained his resolve. Your husband stood for the truth, he told Sarah during their final meeting. The least I can do is follow his example. His testimony would either bring down Hayes' empire or cost him his life. The question was which would come first. The story of Michael Anderson's fight for justice has touched many hearts. If you believe in truth and redemption, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together we can share more powerful stories that remind us of the strength of human spirit and the power of faith. Pastor James Wilson knew the risks when he began secretly collecting evidence inside the prison. Years of ministry had taught him to read people, to understand the subtle dynamics of power and corruption. He noticed the guards who looked away during attacks on Michael, the mysterious transfers of violent inmates into their block, the systematic attempt to break one man's spirit. The pastor started keeping detailed records in his prayer journal, dates, names, incidents that seemed too coordinated to be random. He noticed patterns in the guard rotations, how certain officers always seemed to be on duty when Michael faced danger. Through his prison ministry connections, he began hearing whispers about payments to guards, about orders coming from outside. Something bigger is happening here, he told Michael during one of their late-night counseling sessions. The violence isn't random. Someone wants you silenced. The pastor used his status to move freely through the prison, observing, listening, documenting everything that might help prove the conspiracy against Michael. When Sarah managed to smuggle Cooper's testimony to Michael during a visit, Pastor James immediately understood its significance. The detailed financial records explained the patterns he'd observed in the prison. He began cross-referencing his observations with Cooper's revelations, building a clear picture of Hayes' influence within the prison system. The pastor's past gave him unique insights. His former life in gang leadership had taught him to recognize organized violence, to see the invisible hands guiding seemingly chaotic events. They're trying to make your death look like typical prison violence, he warned Michael. We need to document everything. James knew he was being watched. His cell was searched more frequently, his phone calls monitored. Anonymous threats appeared in his prayer request box. But the pastor had faced death before, during his gang days and later during his ministry in violent prisons. Fear didn't stop him from doing what he knew was right. The final warning came through official channels. The prison administration announced a review of his ministry credentials. Suddenly, paperwork that had been in order for years needed updating. The message was clear: stop helping Michael Anderson or lose access to his ministry. That night, Pastor James made his decision. He gathered all his documentation, journals, witness statements, correspondence with prison officials, and arranged for its secure delivery to Judge Chen. He knew this action would likely cost him his ministry, possibly his life, but he remembered his own journey from darkness to light. The attack came the next morning in the chapel. 3 inmates with crude weapons cornered him after early prayer service. James recognized them as recent transfers, known for doing special jobs for corrupt guards. He managed to fight back, his old street fighting skills returning, but they had orders to finish the job. As he lay bleeding on the chapel floor, Pastor James smiled, knowing his evidence was already safe with Judge Chen. His last conscious thought was a prayer for Michael, for Sarah, for all those fighting against Hayes' corruption. The official report would call it a random act of prison violence. The pastor survived the initial attack but fell into a coma. The hospital where he was transferred reported multiple security breaches, unauthorized personnel trying to access his room, tampering with his medication, mysterious power outages on his floor. Judge Chen ordered federal protection, but everyone knew Hayes' reach was long. Michael received the news of James's attack during morning count. The message was clear: no one was safe, not even a respected prison minister. But instead of silencing him, the attack strengthened Michael's resolve. Pastor James had risked everything to expose the truth. Michael would not let that sacrifice be in vain. The pastor's evidence proved crucial. His detailed documentation of prison incidents, combined with Cooper's financial records, demonstrated the systematic nature of the conspiracy against Michael. James had provided the missing link between Hayes' corporate corruption and its violent enforcement within the prison system. In his final conscious moments before the coma, Pastor James had whispered a Bible verse to the nurse: "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." His sacrifice would become both testimony and inspiration, proving that even in the darkest places, truth and justice had powerful allies. The pastor's attack marked a turning point. His extensive prison ministry connections began speaking out, sharing similar stories from other facilities. The wall of silence protecting Hayes's prison operations began to crack as more witnesses found courage in James's example. Emma Anderson's breaking point came during her sophomore debate championship. As she stood at the podium, defending her position on criminal justice reform, a projected image appeared behind her father's mugshot, with the words like father, like daughter. The audience gasped, then snickered. Emma froze, her carefully prepared arguments dying in her throat. The sabotage had been carefully planned. Her debate notes had been stolen and replaced with printouts of newspaper articles about her father's case. Her team's research materials had mysteriously disappeared. But it was the mugshot that broke her, seeing her father's tired, haunted eyes projected larger than life before her peers. That night, Emma suffered her first panic attack. Sarah found her in the school bathroom, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," she sobbed. "Everyone thinks we're criminals. They won't even listen to the truth." The straight student who had never missed a day of school now begged to be homeschooled. Daniel's situation deteriorated more quietly. The once energetic 10-year-old developed severe asthma triggered by the stress of his father's imprisonment. His attacks became more frequent, more severe, requiring expensive medications their decimated insurance barely covered. At night, he would wake up gasping for air, calling for his father. The school nurse called Sarah one afternoon. Daniel had collapsed during recess. At the hospital, doctors discovered his asthma had developed into a more serious respiratory condition. The specialist they needed wasn't covered by their insurance. Sarah faced an impossible choice between Daniel's health and continuing to fund Michael's legal defense. Emma's grades began to slip for the first time in her life. Teachers who had once praised her work now found fault with everything she submitted. Her college counselor suggested she consider less competitive schools, given her family situation. The message was clear: her father's alleged crimes had marked her future. The siblings' suffering took different forms. Emma became withdrawn, spending hours researching her father's case, trying to understand the legal complexities that had torn their family apart. Daniel's illness made him clingy, afraid to let Sarah out of his sight, as if she too might disappear like his father. During prison visits, Michael struggled to connect with his children through the glass partition. Emma avoided eye contact, ashamed of her debate failure, while Daniel's breathing wheezed audibly in the prison's stale air. Sarah watched helplessly as her family crumbled, unable to protect her children from the collateral damage of Hayes's vendetta. The crisis peaked when Daniel was hospitalized with a severe asthma attack. The doctors wanted to keep him for observation, but their insurance denied the claim. Sarah spent hours arguing with administrators, trying to prevent them from discharging him. Finally, Judge Chen intervened, using her connections to secure proper medical care. Emma found her voice again, but differently. She started a blog about children of wrongfully convicted parents, creating a support network for families like hers. The blog attracted attention from advocacy groups, but also made her more of a target. Her school locker was vandalized with the word criminal spray painted across it. Daniel's health struggles became a symbol of Hayes's cruelty. The same man who donated millions to children's hospitals had no qualms about destroying a child's life to protect his criminal empire. When Cooper learned about Daniel's condition, he provided records showing Hayes had deliberately pressured the insurance company to deny coverage. The children's suffering affected Michael deeply. During one visit, seeing Daniel's inhaler in Emma's hollow eyes, he nearly agreed to Hayes's offered plea deal. Only Sarah's fierce intervention stopped him from falsely confessing to protect his children. "They need your truth more than your surrender," she insisted. Emma's debate humiliation spread online, posted and reposted with cruel comments. The viral nature of her breakdown added a new dimension to the family's suffering. College admissions officers would later admit they found her name toxic, despite her excellent academic record. Her dream of studying law seemed to be slipping away. Through it all, the siblings clung to each other. Emma would read to Daniel during his breathing treatments, sharing stories their father used to tell. Daniel would leave encouraging notes in Emma's textbooks. Their bond strengthened even as their world fell apart, a testament to the resilience of family love in the face of injustice. Sarah watched her children grow up too fast, forced to confront adult realities of corruption, injustice, and prejudice. The carefree childhood she and Michael had worked so hard to provide was shattered. Yet somehow her children's suffering became fuel for the fight, strengthening their family's determination to expose the truth no matter the cost. The news of Rachel Hayes' terminal diagnosis reached Sarah through Catherine Hayes' former assistant. At 32, Robert Hayes' only daughter was dying of an aggressive form of leukemia, her wealthy father's influence powerless against the disease. More significantly, she was asking to speak with Sarah Anderson. The meeting was arranged in Rachel's private hospital room, secured by Judge Chin to prevent interference. Sarah found a frail young woman, her once beautiful face gaunt from chemotherapy, but her blue eyes burning with desperate purpose. "I don't have much time," Rachel whispered, "and I need to make things right." Rachel's confession spilled out in a torrent of guilt and grief. She had discovered her father's crimes years ago during her work at the Hayes Foundation. The charitable organization was a front, laundering money from illegal operations. Michael Anderson's meticulous accounting had threatened to expose everything, leading to her father's desperate plan to frame him. "I helped them," Rachel admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I knew what they were doing to your family, and I stayed silent. I even helped create some of the fake documentation." Her hands trembled as she handed Sarah a USB drive. "Everything is here, all the original files, showing how they manipulated the evidence against your husband." The deathbed confession went deeper than anyone expected. Rachel revealed how her father had systematically destroyed anyone who threatened his empire. Michael wasn't the first innocent person Hayes had framed, but he was the one that had finally broken Rachel's conscience. "I watched them tear your family apart," she sobbed. "I saw what it did to your children." Rachel's testimony included recorded conversations with her father discussing Michael's frame-up. She had secretly documented meetings where Hayes and his associates planned the elaborate scheme. "Dad became paranoid after Michael noticed the accounting irregularity," she explained. "He said he had to make an example, to discourage others from looking too closely." The dying woman also revealed the extent of her father's political influence. Judges, prosecutors, FBI agents, Hayes had compromised them all through a combination of bribes and blackmail. Rachel had attended the private parties where deals were made, where public servants were corrupted, where justice was sold to the highest bidder. As her strength faded, Rachel shared the most damning evidence, her father's private ledger, detailing decades of criminal transactions. "He trusted me with everything," she said bitterly. "He never thought his own daughter would betray him. But watching what he did to your family, I couldn't die with this secret." Sarah found herself holding Rachel's hand as the young woman's confession continued. Despite everything the Hayes family had done to destroy her own, she couldn't help feeling compassion for this dying daughter, trying to right her father's wrongs before time ran out. "I'm so sorry," Rachel repeated, her voice growing weaker. "I was a coward for waiting until now." The hospital room became a confessional as Rachel detailed her father's empire of corruption. She named names, provided dates, outlined the complex network of shell companies and fraudulent charities. Each revelation was meticulously documented in the files she provided, creating an ironclad case against her father and his conspirators. Rachel's medical team interrupted several times, concerned about her deteriorating condition. But she insisted on continuing, driven by the urgent need to unburden her conscience. "My father always taught me that power was everything," she reflected. "But watching your family's strength, your loyalty to each other, I finally understood what real power is." As Rachel's confession neared its end, she made one final request. "Tell your husband I'm sorry," she whispered, "and tell your children that sometimes doing the right thing takes more courage than we think we have." Hours after Sarah left her room, Rachel Hayes slipped into a coma from which she would never wake. The USB drive Rachel provided became the key to unraveling Hayes' entire operation. Her meticulous documentation, combined with Cooper's testimony and Pastor James's evidence, created an unshakable case. She had recorded everything, perhaps knowing that only her death would make the truth undeniable. Judge Chin moved quickly to secure Rachel's evidence, knowing Hayes would do anything to suppress his daughter's final act of rebellion. Within hours of Rachel's death, her hospital room was broken into, her personal effects searched. But the truth she had entrusted to Sarah was already safe, protected by federal marshals. The daughter's betrayal would prove to be the father's undoing. Rachel's deathbed confession, driven by guilt and a final desire for redemption, would shake Hayes's empire to its foundations. Her last act of courage would help free an innocent man and expose decades of corruption, though she wouldn't live to see justice done. The dominoes began to fall with breathtaking speed after Rachel Hayes's confession. Judge Chen coordinated with federal authorities to execute simultaneous raids on Hayes's businesses and his associates' homes. The evidence was overwhelming: decades of corruption documented in meticulous detail by the dying daughter who had finally chosen truth over family loyalty. FBI agent Thompson was arrested during his morning briefing, his colleagues watching in shock as he was led away in handcuffs. The offshore accounts Rachel had documented proved impossible to deny. His sudden cooperation, hoping for leniency, implicated dozens of other agents in Hayes's web of corruption. District Attorney Palmer attempted suicide when he learned of the raids, surviving only to face multiple federal indictments. His office had been the linchpin of Hayes's local power, ensuring that investigations were buried and prosecutions were directed at Hayes's enemies. His files revealed hundreds of cases tainted by corruption. Governor Marshall resigned in disgrace as evidence of his involvement became public. The development projects Rachel had documented showed a clear pattern of kickbacks and bribes, all carefully laundered through Hayes's charitable foundations. His administration had effectively sold the state's resources to criminal enterprises. The prison system's corruption proved especially shocking. Rachel's files showed how Hayes had turned correctional facilities into profit centers, using them to silence witnesses and enforce his will. The attacks on Michael and Pastor James were revealed as part of a systematic program of intimidation and violence. Judge Harrison, who had denied Michael's bail and rushed his conviction, was found dead in his chambers, an apparent heart attack, as federal agents approached to arrest him. His financial records, detailed in Rachel's evidence, showed millions in payments from Hayes's shell companies, all perfectly concealed until now. Local media, finally free from Hayes's influence, began exposing the full scope of his criminal empire. The same newspapers that had condemned Michael now ran front-page stories about the corruption that had framed him. Editorial boards called for investigations into every case Hayes had touched. Catherine Hayes filed for divorce, claiming ignorance of her husband's crimes. But Rachel's evidence showed her complicity. She had helped manage the charitable foundations that laundered money, had participated in blackmailing officials, had knowingly befriended Sarah while helping to destroy her family. The investigation expanded beyond state lines as Rachel's documents revealed Hayes's national network. Other wrongfully convicted individuals were identified, their cases showing the same pattern of planted evidence and rushed convictions. Hayes had replicated his method of destroying threats across multiple jurisdictions. Professional associations began reviewing every case connected to Hayes's operation. The accounting firm that had replaced Michael's discovered widespread fraud in Hayes's businesses. Environmental inspectors found devastating violations at his development sites. Safety regulators uncovered years of covered-up accidents and deaths. The human cost of Hayes's corruption became clearer with each new revelation. Communities poisoned by illegal dumping, workers killed in unsafe conditions, families destroyed by wrongful convictions, all sacrificed to maintain his power and profit. Rachel's documentation put faces and names to each tragedy. As the investigation expanded, more whistleblowers came forward. Hayes's former employees, encouraged by Rachel's example, began sharing their own evidence of corruption. Each new testimony reinforced the others, creating an insurmountable case against the man who had thought himself untouchable. Hayes himself was arrested at his daughter's funeral, a final indignity that seemed fitting given Rachel's role in his downfall. Federal agents waited until after the service, showing more respect for the dead than Hayes had ever shown his victims. His empire crumbled as he was led away, his carefully constructed facade of legitimacy shattered. The corruption's exposure triggered systemic reforms. New oversight committees were established, whistleblower protections strengthened, judicial accountability measures implemented. Rachel's evidence had revealed not just individual crimes, but institutional failures that had allowed corruption to flourish. Sarah watched the systems collapse with mixed emotions. Each new arrest, each exposed conspiracy brought Michael's freedom closer. But the scale of corruption they had uncovered was staggering. How many other families had been destroyed? How many other innocent people were still imprisoned? The reform process would take years, but Rachel's deathbed confession had started an unstoppable chain reaction. The corrupt system that had protected Hayes for decades was being dismantled piece by piece. But her final act of courage had accomplished what seemed impossible, exposing the truth and beginning the long process of restoring justice. Michael Anderson walked out of prison on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 2 years, 7 months and 13 days after his wrongful imprisonment. The media crews that had once documented his shame now captured his vindication. Sarah, Emma, and Daniel waited at the prison gates, their faces a mixture of joy and lingering trauma. The reunion was both beautiful and awkward. Daniel, now 12, hesitated before hugging his father, his body tense with uncertainty. Emma, 16 and more reserved than Michael remembered, managed a tearful smile but kept a slight distance. Sarah alone seemed unchanged in her love, though her eyes carried shadows of their ordeal. Judge Chen had expedited Michael's release after Rachel Hayes' evidence proved his innocence beyond any doubt. The official record was expunged, his conviction overturned, and a formal apology issued by the state. But paper declarations couldn't erase the time lost, the trust broken, the innocence shattered. The family's first dinner together was interrupted by Daniel's asthma attack, triggered by the excitement. Michael watched helplessly as Sarah expertly handled the inhaler, a routine he hadn't been there to learn. Emma quietly explained their system for managing her brother's condition, her mature competence a testament to how much she'd grown up without him. Returning to their home revealed other changes. Sarah had sold most of their furniture to pay legal bills. Michael's office, once filled with awards and community recognition, was now Emma's study space, walls covered with college research and legal texts. The house felt smaller, or perhaps he had become a stranger in it. The community's reaction to his exoneration was complex. Some neighbors brought welcome home casseroles and tearful apologies. Others still crossed the street to avoid him, their doubt lingering despite his proven innocence. The local paper that had condemned him now wanted an exclusive interview, offering payment for his story. Michael's first Sunday back at church split the congregation. Some welcomed him warmly, while others whispered that where there's smoke, there's fire. The pastor, who had once shunned them, now invited Michael to share his testimony, an offer he declined. His faith had deepened in prison, but his trust in religious institutions had been shaken. Professional reinstatement proved challenging. His accounting license was restored, but clients were hesitant to return. The business community that had once celebrated him now viewed him with uncertainty. Some suggested he was too controversial to work with, despite his exoneration. The taint of accusation lingered like a shadow. The hardest part was relearning his role as father. Emma had grown into a passionate advocate for criminal justice reform, her teenage years shaped by fighting for his freedom. Daniel's illness had made him more dependent on Sarah, their bond strengthened through adversity. But Michael felt like an observer in their lives, struggling to find his place. Pastor James, still recovering from his injuries, became a crucial support in Michael's adjustment. The pastor understood the challenges of rejoining society, the complex emotions of freedom after confinement. Their friendship, forged in prison's darkness, grew stronger in freedom's light. The Anderson family attended therapy together, learning to navigate their new dynamics. Emma struggled with anger not at her father, but at a system that had stolen their normal life. Daniel's anxiety manifested in fears of losing his father again. Sarah worked to balance, supporting Michael's reintegration while maintaining the strength that had sustained them. Michael found himself jumping at sudden noises, uncomfortable in crowds, struggling with simple decisions. Prison habits died hard. He still woke at 5 a.m. for count, still checked sight lines in every room, still hoarded small items out of ingrained scarcity. Freedom required its own kind of rehabilitation. The media attention was double-edged. Their story helped expose systemic corruption, but also meant constant reminders of their trauma. Talk shows wanted interviews, book publishers offered deals, movie producers sought rights. Michael and Sarah agreed to share their story only if it helped other wrongfully convicted families. Financial compensation from the state helped rebuild their stability, but money couldn't buy back lost time. Michael missed Emma's first debate victory, Daniel's Little League championship, countless family dinners and homework sessions. These gaps in their shared history created a subtle distance that all the love in the world couldn't quite bridge. Yet amidst these challenges, the Andersons found new strength in their survival. Their family bond, tested by fire, emerged stronger but forever changed. Michael's release marked not an ending, but a beginning, the start of a different kind of journey, one of healing, rebuilding and rebuilding and rediscovering each other. 1 year after his release, Michael Anderson stood before a different kind of audience, a room full of law students at Harvard Law School, where Emma would soon begin her studies. His daughter sat in the front row, beaming with pride as her father shared their story of injustice and resilience, now part of the curriculum on prosecutorial misconduct. The Anderson Justice Initiative, funded by their compensation settlement, became their family's new mission. Sarah managed victim support programs, drawing on her counseling background to help other families navigate wrongful convictions. Daniel, his health finally stabilized, created a children's support group for kids with incarcerated parents. Emma interned with the Innocence Project, her personal experience fueling her passion for justice reform. Michael's perspective on redemption evolved beyond his previous understanding. He visited prisons not as a former inmate but as an advocate, working alongside Pastor James, who had recovered enough to resume his ministry. Together, they developed programs combining practical legal support with spiritual guidance for wrongfully convicted inmates. The exposure of Hayes's corruption led to systemic reforms, with Michael testifying before state legislatures and congressional committees. His testimony, combined with his professional expertise, helped shape new laws protecting whistleblowers and strengthening oversight of corporate prison relationships. The system that had nearly destroyed him was being transformed by his experience. Forgiveness proved more complex than Michael had imagined. He found he could forgive Hayes's daughter Rachel, understanding her final courage. He could even forgive the prison guards who had looked away during attacks, recognizing their own entrapment in a corrupt system. But forgiving the time stolen from his children, that remained a daily struggle. Sarah's book, Standing with Truth, became a bestseller, its royalties supporting other families fighting wrongful convictions. She wrote honestly about the strain on their marriage, the challenges of rebuilding trust not just in the system but in their shared future. Their story inspired other couples facing similar battles, showing that love could survive even the harshest tests. Daniel's asthma became manageable as family stress decreased. He discovered a talent for art, creating powerful pieces about separation and reunion that were displayed at justice reform exhibitions. His childhood trauma transformed into a source of healing for others, his artwork giving voice to children's experiences with wrongful convictions. The Anderson home became a gathering place for advocates, lawyers, and families fighting similar battles. Sunday dinners often included former inmates, judges committed to reform, and law students eager to learn from their experience. Their tragedy had created a new kind of community united by the pursuit of justice. Emma's journey to Harvard Law carried special significance. She would study in the same halls where some of Hayes's corrupt judges had learned their profession. Her admission essay about fighting for her father's freedom caught the attention of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who became her mentor. The system that had once threatened to destroy her future now offered a platform for creating change. Pastor James's prison ministry expanded nationally with Michael's support. They developed programs specifically for white-collar inmates, recognizing how false accusations could destroy not just individuals but entire families. Their work bridged racial and social divides, showing how justice reform could unite diverse communities. The Anderson story became a case study in resilience and purpose born from injustice. Michael and Sarah were invited to speak at conferences, universities, and religious institutions, sharing not just their tragedy but their vision for reform. Their experience demonstrated how personal devastation could fuel systemic change. They established a scholarship fund in Rachel Hayes's name, supporting children of incarcerated parents who wanted to study law. This decision sparked controversy but reflected their understanding of how corruption poisoned both victims' and perpetrators' families. Rachel's final courage deserved recognition, even as they fought against her father's legacy. The family's healing remained ongoing. Regular therapy sessions continued, now focused on building their future rather than just surviving their past. They learned to celebrate small victories: Daniel's first sleepover since Michael's return, Emma's acceptance to Harvard, Sarah's advocacy award, Michael's professional reinstatement. Their story ended not with neat closure but with committed purpose. The Andersons transformed their trial into a mission, their pain into advocacy, their experience into expertise. They proved that justice, while imperfect, could be reformed through persistent effort and unwavering faith in truth. Michael's closing words at Harvard became their family's motto: justice isn't just a system, it's a commitment we make to each other. Our story isn't about what was lost, but what can be rebuilt when we stand together for truth. Dear friends, Michael Anderson's powerful story of faith, justice, and redemption has touched all our hearts. If you believe in the power of truth and the strength of family bonds, please support our team by subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. Share this video with your loved ones. Everyone needs to hear this inspiring story of hope and perseverance. What touched you most about Michael's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And tell us, would you like to hear part 2 of this extraordinary story? Your support means everything to us.